Welcome to the 7th installment of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project's Remembering 1922 video series. In this and all upcoming episodes of the series, the names of the interviewees have been coded to protect their identity. This episode presents the experiences of migration, escape, and expulsion from villages on the islands of Gökçeada and Bozcaada, which in Greek and Anglophone historiography are identified as the islands of Imbros and Tenedos. According to the descendants' recollections, one cause for migration to the U.S. from Gökçeada and Bozcaada was economic migration. Nick, whose family was from Bozcaada, settled in Toledo, Ohio. He provides evidence of this push factor for migration.
My dad was the first one to immigrate to the United States. He came as a very young boy at 13 years old. And he was to report to, I believe, an uncle here that had a restaurant. And he came over, like I say, he came over at 13 years old. He came from a large family, from what I understand. And they couldn't afford to have all these, raise all these children in Tenedos. It's such a large family, and there wasn't that much work available. So he had an opportunity to come to the United States and work in a restaurant that his uncle had. And he started out sweeping floors and working in the kitchen. And he'd do that and go to school during the day. And I recall him telling me that he had trouble picking up English at first, and some of his classmates would make fun of him because of his accent. And so in order to overcome that, he just tried that much harder to learn the English language, and it got to the point where he had no accent whatsoever. I mean, you'd never recognize him as being of Greek descent. My dad went back to Greece a few times, I believe, and somehow he met up with my mother, and they got married and came back on the ship to Greece. I believe they got married in Greece, and they stopped off in France, and from France they came to New York.
Next, Helen's maternal grandparents and mother left Bozcaada twice. Their first migration was under threat for their life during World War I. After the armistice, they returned to the island and migrated to Greece in the 1930s for medical reasons. This was possible because the island's Grecophone Orthodox population was protected by the Treaty of Lausanne.
They were fleeing the island, and she remembered bullets flying over her head, and she was pregnant at the time, running to get away, and I guess they got to the merchant ship and left and went over to it's called Tsanakale, I think. And I think they were also in Limnos at one other time. She came to the United States because her children came over, but when she left Tenedos, they had to leave Tenedos because my grandfather was sick with cancer, and they went to Piraeus to get treatment for him. So that's why they left Tenedos.
Tom's family, on the other hand, did not experience displacement during World War I, nor a return to Gökçeada, followed by an escape or expulsion to the U.S.
They left out of their own free will. My father and his best friend and my grandparents, my grandmother and great aunt and my mother, they left out of that. They were able to sell their house and sell their stuff. And my mother just told me the trip is my grandmother and my great aunt stayed in the cabin the entire trip. They were seasick, And my mother was like 10 years old and a little princess, I guess, and she had the run of the ship.
As was the case for Helen's family, George's paternal family remained in Gökçeada due to the stipulations in the Treaty of Lausanne. George discusses his father's migration from Gökçeada to Florida in the 1950s for economic reasons. George's father jumped ship in New York to enter the U.S. George describes his father's migration from there to Florida.
My father came sort of a circuitous route through through the Mexican, through the Puerto Rican lady, and ended up in Chicago. And he met my mother in 1962, and around, let's say, April, May of 1962, and then they married in June of 1962, and I was born in 1963. After that, with the help of my mom, my parents brought my dad's sister and my dad's parents to the United States. Lived in Miami for a while, but then lived in Tarpon Springs and all of the rest of their lives. Lots of kids that later on in his life, a few of them ended up in Tarpon Springs, and he got to see them. But although we lived in Miami, he later on in life moved to Tarpon Springs. And so we got to see a few of those people. And those embryotes, embryotes that lived in Tarpon Springs would get together with my dad. They'd have some time and play tavoli, play backgammon.
As the recollections of interviewees in this episode have shown, migration from the islands of Gökçeada and Bozcaada was multifaceted. We heard experiences of economic migration and expulsion. We also heard at least one case of a family remaining on the island of Gökçeada into the 1960s. In the next episode, we will shift our focus to the tragic events surrounding the destruction of the city of Izmir and stories of transnationalism, migration, expulsion, and escape to the United States. The researchers at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project would like to thank you, our listeners, for your support of this important research. We look forward to your comments and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed producing it. See you next time.